Hey, how you doing, everybody? Today I want to talk to you guys about creative zone modes, okay? And on your camera, there's your dial, and if you look in your book, it's like, these are the creative zone modes. In the creative zone modes, there's what's P, which is program mode, which is a lot like green mode. I never really use it. There's M, which is manual, which is all I've been talking about to you guys, is shooting manual and knowing, how to use your shutter speeds and your apertures and your ISOs and all that stuff in order to get what you want. But then there's one called AV and one called TV. And on Nikons, they're a little different. I think it might be AP and TP, but I'm not positive because I don't shoot Nikon. But either way, they're the same thing. The A is for aperture, and AV means aperture value. AP means aperture priority. And I'm used to them being AP, which is priority, okay? TV stands for, the T stands for time, okay? So this is the way they work. It's very simple, okay? In your camera, there's your meter. And your meter is, it's telling you if you're getting too much light or too little bit of light, and your meter moves around and it lets you know what's going on. Well, if you have it on green mode, if you ever shot in green mode, which most people have, you'll know that, the camera decides everything, and it keeps that little thing right there, okay? Well, when you're shooting in aperture value mode or aperture priority mode, what it does is it sets the aperture as the priority, and it doesn't set it, you do. So if you want a wide aperture so that you can get that depth of field, you punch into your camera, you say, okay, don't punch it into it, but just, click it into it. You tell the camera, I want my aperture to be at 2.8. Now, wherever you point your camera, whatever lighting changes around you, the camera's going to change the shutter speed in order to keep that camera at the right exposure, the exposure that you decided you wanted it at. So, let's say you moved from where it's nice and lit up to somewhere where it's darker. Well, it's going to slow down the exposure of the shutter in order to let more light in. If you go into a bright area, it's going to speed up the shutter speed so that it's going to make less light come in. Now, if you were on green mode, it switched both things around. But if you set the priority in the aperture to be, the aperture is the priority, then the camera is going to respond by setting the time value. On the other side of that token, if you choose time value and the time is the most important thing, the time that the shutter speed stays open is your priority. If you need to, let's say, freeze motion and you need to be at, a 500th of a second, and you know that you need that 500th of a second, but the aperture isn't so important. Well, when you're shooting, if you set it on time value, and let's say you're shooting a baseball game or something, and you know that at 500th of a second you can get the motion that you want. Well, if clouds come in and they cover up the sun a little bit, what your camera's going to do is it's going to change the aperture. It's going to open up the aperture so that the exposure stays the same, but the time is the exposure stays the same, the time value stays the same, but the aperture is going to be the thing that's going to be adjusting. So you set the priority of the time value. And that's all there is to it. They're very simple, but they come in handy. I don't use them all too much. I like to be on manual all the time. But every now and again, I'll find a situation where I'm like, oh, okay, so if you learn it, get used to it, then you'll know when it's good for you, and you'll know when it's not good for you, okay? So that's the basics of time value or time priority shooting and aperture value priority shooting. Now, there's a little bit more to it because, like I said, that little meter is going to be, your little meter is going to be right in the center, right? But you can adjust that. You can adjust for situations. You can adjust for certain situations with what's called exposure compensation, okay? So when you're in your aperture value and that, the little meter is right on the center and it's like, this is going to be the perfect exposure, and what we're going to do is we're going to change the time value to make this the perfect exposure. If you know you're in a situation such as shooting a wedding, and the bride's got a big white gown on, and when you shoot, your camera might think it's exposed, but it's going to be underexposed because it sees all that white and it thinks it's a lot of light, but it's just a lot of white. Well, what you do is you compensate for that by saying you want to overexpose by a stop and a half. And the aperture will stay the same, and the camera will always be overexposing when it changes its shutter speed. It thinks it's overexposing, but you've compensated for what's around. Same thing as if you're shooting in something that's all black. And your camera might want you to open your camera way up to get a proper exposure, but what it's trying to do is make that black appear as a gray. Or, it's trying to... we discussed metering in a different chapter, so if you want to check out the metering chapter, go for that. But it's the same concept. Your camera's going to be trying to expose incorrectly if there's a lot of black in the scene or a lot of white in the scene or a lot of bright lights in the scene. Your camera will do it wrong. So when you're doing your aperture value mode or your time value mode, what you do is you compensate for those, and the camera will get what you say is the right exposure by changing the aperture if you're in time value or the time if you're in aperture value. So you know, it's a little confusing even to talk about. But and when you start using it, you'll understand it's real quick and easy to get. And, you know, check it out. And, you know, I hope you find some good use for your aperture value and your time value. Simple stuff. Check it out.